Out in the Far East, British and Commonwealth troops would wear brown, waterproof leather boots, if they were lucky, and they would wear battle dress trousers, but in made a lightweight cotton material with the map pocket on the left leg, and then a first aid dressing pouch on top of the right leg. And this soldier is carrying the Mark 1 Bren machine gun, and this one's actually got a bullet catcher, a canvas bullet catcher attached to it. They wouldn't use those out in the out in the jungle or out in the open. They were on there for if he's in an armoured vehicle or on board a ship, so he won't be slipping around on the empty cases. But when I bought it, it came with that on, so I've just left it on just to show you what they look like. If you look inside there, you can just about see the date, 1944. Then you look underneath, they're the special cleats they had. Some of the cleats, they were like a joined up pieces there. But those boots have never ever been used. It always amazes me that during the war there's probably soldiers who were short of equipment and never got these special boots. And there's a pair there, never ever been used. The shirt is based on the battle dress blouse, only made of a cotton Airtex material. That was made out in India mostly, because India was close by, and they've been using that there a long time before anyway. And then they would use the ordinary 37 pattern equipment, but out in the hot, humid conditions of the Far East, the uniforms and equipment didn't last very long. The cotton would rot away really quickly. So this man is really smart at the moment, but he won't look like that once he's been out on active service for a while. And then also out there, they would wear the slouch hat. That was to protect them from the monsoon rains and the sun. The men would be quite often issued with a machete. This is a British made one. And then there's the water canteen. This is an Indian made one. It's slightly different than the British. It has a rim around the top and the bottom, and then the stopper is slightly different as well. And when I bought this, it didn't have a felt cover, so I'm not sure whether they were issued with them or not, but I would have thought they would have been, but mine didn't have it on when I bought it. This is the British made machete. It's quite a heavy piece of equipment. There's no date on that. There's a maker's mark. There's a date on the scabbard of 1944. But they would also be issued with the Indian made ones. Now the Indian made ones, the blade's wider at the tip, so they has to come out of the side of the scabbard like that. And when I bought this, the dealer I bought it from, he said, just before I came along, another chap was looking at it and interested in buying it, and he said, well, I would have had that if the scabbard hadn't been split at the side. But that's the only way you can get it in, so luckily for me he didn't buy it, otherwise I wouldn't have had it. Out in the Far East, the British 14th Army was commanded by General William Slim under the Supreme Allied Commander Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten made several trips out there to speak to the troops. But the army was always short of equipment. The bulk was kept back in Europe, ready for the D-Day landings. And in early 1944, the Japanese were marching through Burma to invade India. And on the route lay two small villages, Kohima and Imphal. Kohima sits on top of a pass through which runs a road, which was the best way to get from Burma to India. Slim knew he had to block that route. The Japanese attacked, and the British and Indian troops in Kohima were surrounded and cut off. The fighting there was just unbelievable and lasted 50 days till relief arrived. The British and Indians, they could only be supplied with food and supplies dropped in by parachute. That's one of the biggest use of parachute dropping in supplies during the war, I think. And this battle was a turning point. Up until then, the Japanese had not been defeated and was the start of the end for the Japanese expansion, really. And the people out there, they've been sometimes been known as the Forgotten Army, because around the same time D-Day was happening and Burma was a long, long way away. And this gave rise to the Kohima epitaph, which says, "When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today." It wasn't just British and Indian troops fighting the Japanese in the Far East. There were Chinese troops as well fighting on our side. There was soldiers from East and West Africa, Australians and Americans. But today there are a few people out there who say these others are all forgotten and never mentioned. Well, they've obviously never read a book. I suggest you go and read a book. This would be a good one to start with. This was printed in actually 1946. You've got there telling you all about the Chinese troops. That's Mountbatten talking to the soldiers. Then you've got the Gurkhas, that's how they carry the wounded. They could carry them for miles like that. Then you've got West African soldiers in there, all about the West Africans. Now that's Kohima. That's Garrison Hill. That was just unbelievably, it was grim. And at times, the British and the Indians could be just 50 yards away from the Japanese in the trench and just be lobbing grenades at each other. It was just unbelievable. And then, as I mentioned before, how all the supplies were dropped in by parachute. This photograph here, this is all the parachutes were collected up and used again. You see there in the background, there are all parachutes. There's hundreds of parachutes there. The more I read about the Second World War and see photographs like this, the more I realise the scale of the thing. It's just unbelievable. It's mind-boggling. You just can't comprehend it. The Bren was developed from a Czech design. The first British ones came out in 1937 and went on into use into the early 1980s. It had a 30-round curved magazine that carried 303 cartridges. This is a Mark I version, but as the war went on, they tried to simplify the design and make it a bit lighter, so there was 4 marks in the end. And you'd always carry a spare barrel, because when you're under sustained fire, the barrels get really hot. But they could change the barrel within 3 seconds. The handle in front of the magazine there, that's for carrying the machine gun. But that's attached to the barrel, so that makes it quicker to replace the barrel when it gets too hot. There's an attachment underneath the butt there, right at the back there. That's for just attaching another handle on there to make it more secure in firing, but I don't have one on there at the moment. I'm on the lookout for one of those. Like I said, this is a Mark I version and it's dated 1942. These are original Japanese army boots from the Second World War, and they came with the original laces, but the laces are a bit, they're a bit weak now. When I tried to tighten up the boots, they did snap one, so I can't quite fasten up the boots properly. Now the puttees, they're wrapped round in a special way. Halfway up, when you're wrapping them round, you fold them over to make a V shape. You can't see it, it's under those cross straps there. And then the end straps, they're wrapped round to make a cross pattern at the front there. It's not great, but it's the best I could do with it. And then the soldier would have an Arisaka rifle, and all the Japanese soldiers, they would wear breeches as well. This is the lightweight summer cotton uniform, and the badges on the collar, they're the ranking insignia. This is for a superior private, I think. And all the soldiers would have 3 ammunition pouches made of leather. There's 2 at the front and 1 at the back. The one at the back has an oil bottle attached to it for cleaning the rifle. And if you look at the bayonet, this one still has its hooked quilling on. Most of the countries got rid of them by now. They were only used in the days of cavalry. Now the small bag at the front, that's for some of their personal bits of equipment. Now my brother-in-law Tim, he knows a Chinese translator, and they've tried to translate it for me. And on the letter they sent me, they did say that although the original text is in Japanese, most of the words are in traditional Chinese. But they did say, this translation, it's only for reference. It's not presented as an accurate translation of the original text. So that's the best they could do. And some of it says mobilization, occasions, things to carry. And they've got to have their army handbook in there, the written mobilization notice, savings passbook, and all sorts of other things. So that's just that matter. Like they said, it's not an accurate description. But that's the closest that we could get to it. If anybody knows what that was for and what it actually says, just let me know in the comments, please. On the helmet, they have a metal star fastened to the front, and the chin strap, that should be fastened in a special way. There should be two loops around their ears, goes around the back of the neck, then under the chin. But the strap on this one, because it's original, it's been snapped at some times, so it's not long enough. So I've only been able to put it around under the chin, but that's not quite right. The backpack is the Type 99 Taco Pack, but it sometimes was known as the Octopus Pack because of all the ribbons and straps to hold on the equipment. There's no buckles on there whatsoever. Everything's tied on with a strap. And around the backpack, that's the shelter half. Now, it should have a woolen blanket there, really wrapped round, and the shelter half should be rolled up short and put on the top. But I haven't got a blanket anyway, and I did try and use something else, and it just got too bulky and it just looked a bit of a mess, so I've just left it like that. So there should be a woolen blanket round there, really. And then on the left-hand side, that's the two-piece entrenching tool. That's actually a replica. Comes in two halves. The case as well, it's a replica, but it's a very good one. Then the metal tin on the back, that's the mess tin, or rice cooker. Underneath that we have the other leather ammunition pouch, and you can just about see the bottle there on the side. That's the oil bottle for when you clean the rifle. And then off on the right hand side there's a haversack for the personal items, and then the usual water canteen. This is the Arisaka Type 38 rifle. It's quite a long rifle. Sometimes with the Japanese only being quite small people, they could be as nearly as tall as the men. And partway through the war, they did change it a little bit. They did try and improve it. They made it a bit shorter, and they had it was what known as the Type 99, but both were used all throughout the war. There are some markings on there, and the flower there, that's the chrysanthemum. That's the national flower of Japan. By 1945, the Japanese were in retreat, and the Americans were pushing on towards Japan. And there's the island of Okinawa, which is just 350 miles from mainland Japan. It's had 4 airfields there, so the Americans were going to try to attack it and capture it. It'd be a good springboard for the invasion of Japan later on. And it was known as Operation Iceberg. But the Japanese, they were just fanatics. They believed their emperor was a god, and they thought it was an honour to die for him, so the fighting over there was just unbelievable. And in the end, 12,000 American soldiers died, and over 100,000 soldiers. But also there's a lot of civilians there as well, Japanese civilians. And the Japanese authorities told the civilians that the Americans were cannibals, and if they surrendered, they would be eaten. So a lot of the civilians committed suicide. I have seen film of a mother, the baby in her arms, jumping off a cliff just to escape from the Americans. Just crazy. And that lasted from the 1st of April till June the 21st. And even when the war was over, the Japanese soldiers, a lot of them, they they thought he was, there was a disgrace to surrender, so they fled into the jungle and hid there. And a lot of them just state there's stories of Japanese soldiers hiding in the jungle for nearly 30 years. One of the most famous one was a chap called, you'll have to excuse my Japanese here, my pronunciation, it's Hiro Anada, and he only surrendered in 1974. After the war, he escaped into the jungle with his friend Kinshishi Kozuka. Kozuka was killed in 1972. He was shot by the Philippine police. And then there's another chap called Shoichi Yoka. He was on the island of Guam. He hid there till 1972. They just didn't want. They were too ashamed to say they surrendered. And also another chap called Kuruo Nakamamurua, and he surrendered in 1974. And I'm sure there was others, but that just shows the mentality of the Japanese at the time.
Eka! Banzai!